Today, we're going to be covering this topic of strategy in 3 easy steps. And if any of you have been through the process of strategic planning, I'm not sure that you would say it's 3 easy steps. So we're going to present an approach today to help you look at using technology and online collaboration with Zoom, and we'll talk about how you can make that happen. If you're new to Bridge Innovate, welcome to our community. We are a global network of business strategists, consultants, and leaders who work alongside you and your team to create defining moments, hopefully for growth and for community good. When we think about strategic planning, I love this quote from Michael Porter. If each of us probably have our own favorite gurus that we follow in strategy. And from Harvard Business School, Michael Porter is a leading professor there in strategy. And he has this quote that says that, strategy is about making choices, about making trade-offs. It's about deliberately choosing to be different. And I think that when we embrace the process of strategy and we start going down that pathway to go from where we are today to where we want to be, to achieving a vision, to achieving some new state, it's really the strategy, the tactics, the initiatives, the projects that we declare, the goals that we declare that take us from where we are today to where we want to be. One of the things that you'll see that we advocate in strategic planning today is that we bolt in the aspects of design thinking into our strategy planning process. That brings in the creative component, it brings in the human-centered design component, and then we sort of bake that in with all of what you would see traditional strategic planning tools into the process. The 3-step process is pretty simple. There is a charter meeting that we always recommend anyone execute at the beginning of a strategy process to define the goals of your strategic planning process. Are there any givens? Who will be on the strategy design team? Is there a timeline that needs to be adhered to? So there is this planning, chartering of the strategy process. But then once you get started, the 3 steps that we advocate focus around research, gathering data, gathering inspiration, gathering sort of information, and then taking that and then going into the key opportunities and ideations phase about if we have a vision to go from here to there, based on our research, what ideas can we generate to mobilize that vision in a greater way? And then the 3rd step, sort of declaring the strategic plan, the strategic initiatives, and how you'll go about implementing. So 3 easy steps: research, ideate, and strategize. And what you'll see here at the bottom are what we would call these synchronous sessions that we're doing now in our remote strategic planning that we're doing with teams, where we'll get onto Zoom and our sprint-based platform. We'll come together for these in-person synchronous sessions. Each of the members of our strategy design teams will have individual work that they'll do along the way that connect into the strategic planning session. And so you can see that the amount of time that it would take minimally for you to work with your team to have a kickoff for about an hour and a half. The ideation session runs about 2 hours, and then the strategize declaration again runs about 2 hours with a follow-on sponsored debrief. Now there's work in between. Not all strategies can be done in this simple time frame, but this is what you're looking at in terms of the 3-step process. Whenever we launch into strategy, I always try to shore up my risk, right? So I'm looking at, why do strategies fail? What does the literature show? And what is my own knowledge when in launching and implementing strategy? And you can see this particular report here that where Forbes, working in conjunction with the Association of Strategic Planning and the Council of Public Relations Firms, interviewed 163 CEOs and found out, that a great number of strategies don't meet their mark. And they're reporting nearly a third. So you say, why? What does the data show in terms of why these strategies are failing? And one is the very top one you can imagine. It's like the pandemic, right? It's COVID. It's unforeseen external circumstances. 24%. The next major reason that strategy fails is the lack of understanding among those involved in developing the strategy about what it will take to make it be successful. The strategy itself is flawed is the third reason. And then the poor match between the strategy and core competencies, like do we have the capabilities to mobilize the strategy? And then the lack of accountability, like, we say we're going to mobilize the strategy, but we just never got around to it. So the things I want to share about here is that when you're launching your strategic planning effort, no matter if you use a 3-step process or any other type of framework, what we're advocating is that always make sure in your research phase that you scan for these external trends. So shore up this risk and make sure this external scan of risk and emerging disruptions are a part of your effort. Form a design team. If you get the right leaders involved in mobilizing and architecting the strategy, then hopefully you'll tackle the problem of number 2, where you have a lack of understanding of what's going to be involved in developing the strategy, what it's going to need to be successful. If you sort of get those leaders involved as a part of the strategy design, there should be a great connection between the knowledge of the strategy element and what it's going to take to succeed. The third component around the strategy itself is flawed. Well, that's why we have to test strategy concepts before we mobilize. And then this whole concept of connecting your strategy to your core competency, again, that goes into this testing and conceptual stages of testing of your strategy before you mobilize. And accountability, I think most of you as leaders know what that means, is you have to make time to connect strategy implementation into all your management meetings. It can't be something that never makes it to your weekly or quarterly agendas. It has to be a part of business as usual and then the strategy mobilization. So let's keep going. The other thing that we find that gets in the way of great strategy is just your strategic agility and the competency of your leadership team. So there's one thing about declaring a great strategy, as the research showed in the previous slide, and then it's this component of mobilizing strategy. So one of the things that we strive to do when we mobilize strategy with a unit, with a team, or an overall business is to ensure that people know that it's not only a strategic planning effort, it is an effort to build management skills and strategic competency. So that when we go through this process, we want to elevate the leader's skill set overall in strategic agility, that they're more sensitive to upcoming opportunities and threats, that they have leadership unity around the vision and the strategic initiatives themselves, and they understand how to mobilize resource fluidity, that they can adapt to the issues at hand, balancing business as usual and strategic mobilization. So we want to make sure that as we mobilize this process, that we're calling out these tactics and capabilities along the way, so that the design team of the strategy is also building their strategic agility skills. And you can see that this sort of experiential learning is really important when you look at the research that shows that the typical retention rate for traditional learning, like I'm doing with you right now, talking to you, excuse me, is about 5%. But if we actually break the learning process into the strategy design process, we have a much higher chance of hitting this 70% job knowledge transfer through experience. Oops. So what is driving this need for agility today? I mean, we are all leaders of our organization experiencing the complexities of the pandemic. So that was certainly an issue that caught many organizations off guard. But generally what we're seeing is technology mobilization, and the advances of technology are driving major shifts in most organizational strategy. And this report comes from the World Economic Forum. You can see this here that shows you these very dramatic spikes of how different technologies are being absorbed into the marketplace. And these major shifts are definitely driving an accelerated shift in how our businesses and organizations are operating. So I want to just get some feedback from you guys on chat. When you think about strategic planning, in the old days, people would have a 5-year strategic plan, but that's changing. What is the frequency that you're seeing that your organizations are using in terms of adjusting your strategic plan? So if you could just go into the chat, is it monthly? Is it annually? Is it every 2 years? Like, give me an idea of how frequently you're adjusting your strategies. Great. Okay. So each year, annually, so I'm seeing a pretty big shift towards annual strategic planning. But things like the COVID environment creating a much more adaptive we're sort of making tweaks to the strategy almost every month, it seems. Okay, great. So having this ability to have sort of this guiding strategy annually, but maybe the ability to agilely adapt that every month seems to be a pattern that I'm seeing from you guys, and we would agree. And that's why this leadership mindset that I want to talk to you next about is probably important. That when we think about the traditional mindset of leaders going into strategy, it's typically around this aspect of what I would call business thinking, where it's much more deductive. It's based on historical data. It's based on having sort of this favored tools that we look at in terms of business thinking, making sure that we get it right. It's a right answer versus a maybe right answer. When we think about the innovative thinking mindset, it's all about possibilities. It's all about imagining new capabilities, new ideas, new services. And what we think about in strategy is that we want to challenge our business leaders who are our design team to blend both, to bring in that rigor of business thinking around historical data, historical trends and patterns, but also be open to looking at new perspectives and considering new ideas and bringing in some of the ambiguity that comes with looking at new services. When you think about this from the Center for Creative Leadership that talks about this blend of business thinking versus innovative thinking, you can see the competencies that come into play here for the leadership teams, where you think on the business thinking side, it's very logical. It sort of looks at precedents. We're quick to decide. Whereas on the right-hand side, on the innovative thinking side, it's much more sort of asking what if. It's using that sort of abductive reasoning competency, sort of not being constrained by the past, but looking into the future. And it's something that when we charter the design team, the strategy design team, we make sure that we encourage them to use this open, this blended mindset between business and innovative thinking. The other thing that's important to us in the three-step process is getting this sort of strategic foresight perspective baked in so that we can see some of these emerging disruptions and these trends that are occurring externally that may not be fully baked yet, but we know that they're coming and they're coming quickly. So we love the work by Amy Webb. She's a professor at the New York University Stern School of Business. And she talks about this sort of myriad of factors and inputs that create the constellation of change that become our future. How do we encourage during the strategy process that we're exploring those emerging trends, that foresight, so that when we declare strategy, that we're taking not only that historical data, but these foresight trends into play. I love this concept of, like, how can we be driving forward and constantly just be looking in the rearview mirror? And this is where we try to make that case with our strategy design team, who are comprised of your leaders, that it's important to look at the historical data, but we have to look ahead as well when we're developing and putting together our strategy. So if you guys would talk to me a little bit more in the chat, how well is your company exploring disruptions and future trends as a part of strategy design? So if you would just give me kind of a number rating in chat. So 1 would be not at all. 3, we're doing somewhat looking at these disruption trends. And 4, extensively. I think we're all getting a bit better at it today with COVID, right? So if you wanted to look at how to deal with disruption, we've been living it for the last 9 months. So I'm seeing 3s and 4s, some 2.5, some 3.5. So I think generally most organizations are building muscle on this, and they've had to because of COVID. So I would just say embrace it, right? Embrace the fact that we have to look at these disruptions and be planning for them in our strategy. And what I'm hearing from you guys today, that might be an annual strategy plan with monthly adaptations. So where is disruption coming from, and what should we be considering when we're looking at our strategic plans, we love this report from Deloitte where they talk about the 7 key disruptors that they see in the future of work. Many of you are feeling this now and embracing it with COVID around the use of technology everywhere. A huge amount of impact coming forward in artificial intelligence, sort of cognitive machine learning, robotics. So this whole disruption happening there. You'll see jobs vulnerability coming into play is a big issue for our educational community about how they'll prepare the future workforce. The explosion of contingency work, and what does that mean? Where people will be moving from employer to employer on more project-based work. The change in the natures of careers. It's going to be very uncommon that you'll see people with organizations for more than 2.5 to 5 years. That will be a long tenure. And then sort of this whole concept of diversity and generational change, and what does that mean for the future of our organizations, and just data everywhere. So I think these are some of the things that we want to bring to the forefront to see how these disruptions are impacting our business and what we might consider in developing our strategy. So again, what we think about the 3-step process, it's this research phase after we do the charter. It's this research phase. Are we looking at historical data? Are we looking at these disruptive trends and patterns? Are we looking at customers, our clients, our key stakeholders, and their perspective? Then from that, we'll sift on the major insights to go through the brainstorming process, the ideation process, and then into strategy declaration. What I'm going to do now is to try to show you a little bit of the technology that we use when we're doing the strategy 3-step process. We use Zoom like we're using today on this webinar for synchronous collaboration to talk and share with each other. And then we also use Sprint-based, which is a wonderful sort of designful technology and where we can all work together synchronously as well as asynchronously. So I'm going to come off of that presentation and go over to Sprint-based and show you a little bit about Sprint-based. Can you guys see my screen, Mary? Can you see Sprint-based? Can you give me a thumbs up? Great. Okay, so here is the 3-step process in Sprint-based, and we launch one of these projects. We just simply need your team's email addresses. We send them an email to invite them to Sprint-based, and they come on, and we do our first research step. Step has usually a little bit longer launch session because we do a bit of orientation on Sprint-based to get everybody ready. And you'll see here that the navigation is pretty easy. We've got the steps here and from research, ideate, and strategize. And then Sprint-based also captures all of our research automatically. So we have a complete PDF to show the world. And you also have the ability to navigate over here on the left-hand side around this. You'll see that there's a place for the design team to come into play here. And there is a calendar where you can lay out all the steps of your strategy. So I'm going to jump into one of the areas and just show you a little bit about how it might look when you're working with your team. On each of the stages of the 3-step process, research, ideate, and strategize, each of them have a guidance tab and a workspace tab. So on the guidance tab, if any of the team gets lost, if they're not sure what to do at this stage, there are always tips to help them get through that part of the work effort. Then you'll see the actual workspace itself, and you'll see some insights that have come forward. We're in step number 2 from the research effort, and then you'll see some different ideas that are being generated based on those insights. So I was going to see if I could show you how easy it is to add a idea. So I was just going to go in. I've got this whole tiny home thing going on around going to see if we can talk about microfinancing. That might be an additional idea to kind of build on the tiny home market. So here's a new creative options for financing. And then I just simply put save. I could complete that in other ways, but here's how easy it is for a team member to simply add an idea during the ideation stage. And then there's also a way that we can open up voting. So when we get to that stage, we can open voting. The team members vote on their favorite ideas to then go on further into the strategize phase. And in this area here is when we would add our strategy framework, whichever you decide in the strategy process. This would give you an idea of, for example, if you were doing an elevator pitch, to pitch a component of the strategy with a team, how you might complete that. Mary, anything else that you would offer here about Sprint Base and how we use the tool?
I mean, I think broadly, it could obviously be any tools. I think the big thing here is that we have created this like simple process and a space where people can work very collaboratively, so that there is opportunity for synchronous and asynchronous. And I think whatever you do, I think it needs a bit of structure, right? So as Jenny mentioned, whenever we jump into some of the strategy work, we make sure that we're looking at some internal data. We don't want to disregard the business thinking. So as you see here, we dove into kind of the SWOT analysis of the business. And then as Jenny mentioned, and Lindsay's kind of in the midst of it now with the Foresight Scouts, we, dig into some of the external trends that might be influencing our business, that might help us inform our strategy moving forward. We want to get beyond the tactical and be really strategic about the big decisions that we are making. And as Jenny is showing here, some of the work that we were doing is, there are a lot of great speakers out there. We might decide to do a guest speaker series during our research phase so that we are able to really gather big insights from these, speakers that we have, the desktop research that we do, as well as some of the internal data we can pull, competitor analysis, we can look at our, customer feedback. So all those combined, gets accumulated to help us drive key insights. As Jenny shared on step 2, we might start to unpack what are the key critical questions that we must answer for our strategy moving forward. And as you know, if you have worked with us before, as Jenny shared with design thinking, we always like to put the user at the center and draft a new opportunity statement using how might we, and build our ideas from that. So you might come up with key strategic ideas and then dig deeper into that. I'm just regurgitating what Jenny shared. I think, what we found is that there are some platforms that will help you streamline some of the process. And what we found is, especially with a team, we always like to have a really diverse team. What has worked with us is having some structured platform that where you can easily share information as well as work together. And also here, one of the things that we like is being able to export the information out, and be able to easily share what are the critical information that the team gathered, as well as the strategy at the end.
Great. Okay, so I'm going to try to go back over here. Can you see my slides now?
Yes.
Oh, great. Okay, so as Mary said, the 3-step strategy process, you can just use conceptually. You don't have to use these technology platforms, but that's what we find works well for us. And when you think about how it plays out visually, you go through this inspiration and empathy phase, gathering all of this data, looking at historical data, emerging trends, looking at customer and stakeholder feedback, all of these different data elements. Then those form key insights. Those insights lead us to opportunities for the future that we brainstorm around, and then we create the strategic plan through these pitch efforts. When we go into the final stages of formalizing the strategy, we like to work with a client to customize the framework for their strategy that they're most comfortable with. This is a pretty traditional strategic plan structure where you have mission, vision, and then different strategic initiatives that mobilize your strategy to get you from here to there, and then the tactics that would go underneath that. We have other teams that use other types of formats. You might be using something like the McKinsey's 3 Horizons of Growth, where you're looking at defending the core and building new emerging strategies to grow the business in different ways. Or you might look at something like this, the business model canvas, or the play to win strategy canvas. We're pretty canvas agnostic. It really depends on what works best for your organization. Many clients today are also taking that core strategy framework and building in customer journey maps as a part of that, so that when they look at their customer's journey, whether it's a student's journey, a buyer's journey, it could be around a nonprofit organization's engagement with a client they're helping. What is that journey and where are the needs and pain points? Many clients are adding this to their strategic planning process to get clear on the pain points that need to be resolved in their business areas. So I just throw that in as an example, and that can also be done on sprint base. So any questions? If you have some questions in the chat about the 3-step process, anything that you might want to ask? The thing I think I would just encourage you guys to think about when you think about this 3-step process, if you're leading strategy, it doesn't have to be, a huge lift. It can be something that in communicating with your teams, if it's just a simple 3 steps, that people know that when we declare a future, we want to take the time to research first, to gather inspiration. We want to take time to then define, of those opportunities that we sifted out through inspiration, how are we going to brainstorm creative ways to solve that, and then declare your strategy initiatives. So I see a question coming in. How do you suggest structuring the team and how that does this process? Good question, Kristen. Thanks so much. So what we typically do is to bring in a set of leaders that are accountable for leading that organization forward. And we have them kind of be as a part of the sponsor team. Sometimes they would appoint people within their organizations to be a part of the research effort. So we might have a core team of 5 leaders as the strategy design team. They might appoint additional members from their departments to be a part of the research gathering effort. And then we organize the research. So some people might be focused on historical data. Some folks might be focused on interviewing key stakeholders. Other folks might be focused on looking at external trends. So great question. Thanks so much for that. We'd be happy to talk to you about this and more of Bridge Innovate's services. Just give us a call. Give me a call, Jenny Whitener. You can reach me at jenny.whitener@bridgeinnovate.com. And good luck with your strategy efforts. We have a lot of upcoming events still for this year. Our Kids Student Invention Challenge is coming to a close, and we have our Virtual Design Awards happening November 17th. We also have Esther Hart doing a Spice Up Your Virtual Meetings with graphic recording. You can engage her for as little as $250 for an hour meeting, and she'll do a live graphic recording. She'll show you how that works. And then we're going to be having a celebration at the end of the year, December 2nd, what we call our Leadership Mingle for Innovation for Good. So please do join us again. And thank you for your time today. Bye now.